From 1878 to 1968, there were 71 lake captains that called Bayview, Wisconsin, on the shore of Lake Michigan, their home. While they lived here, they captained 195 different ships, from tugboats to schooners to steamships, in voyages that took them to every one of the Great Lakes. Join us now for another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we explore not only these captains, but also their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes.
Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we talk about all the lake captains, all 71 of them, that lived in Bayview in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. One of those 71 lived here. His name was John Brotch, and he was Bayview's most prolific schooner captain. His wife, Johanna Brotch, was Bayview's only female ship owner. There's a marker now in front of this house, which is the first time a female ship owner's house or a female entrepreneur, which she was, running the business operations of the schooners, or a Bayview or a lake captain statewide has ever been honored with such a marker. This house was built for Johanna, Captain John Brotch's wife, by her brother, her older brother, William Draves, who is of himself one of Bayview's, in fact the greatest rags to riches story in Bayview history also. We'll have a future episode dedicated to William Draves, but for now, suffice it to say, he took care of his sister. He helped his sister a lot. The book especially gets into the details, and of course we're going to talk about him in our newsletter. Remember, this video is sponsored by the Historic Bayview Lake Captain Society. Membership is free. It's open to anybody. There are no dues. We have a website, a YouTube channel, and a monthly newsletter. All you have to do is go take a look. So we hope you will. So that's the story of John Brotch. He was a great lake ship captain. He sailed the lakes for 17 years, and I am very honored to bring you this story. That's it for today. Thanks again for watching, and remember, hats off to our Bayview Lake captains. See you next time.
Welcome to another installment of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains, where we discuss the lives of the 71 different lake captains that once lived in Bayview, Wisconsin, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries, in the age of sail and steam. This discussion will include their ships, their homes, their families, and their lifetime of sailing adventures on the Great Lakes. Here is the map of lake captains' homes in Bayview, to show you where this episode takes place. Its location focuses primarily on the large green arrow. Today we will be discussing the life of Captain John Brotch, who was Bayview's most prolific schooner captain, captaining at least 3 and as many as 5 different schooners while living in Bayview. He is believed to have been born in July 1854 in Milwaukee. The U.S. Census of 1880 records him having been born in Prussia. However, subsequent reporting tends more towards Wisconsin. His marriage certificate states he was born in Milwaukee. Given his subsequent lifelong residency in Bayview, it's also possible he was not just born in Milwaukee, but actually born in Bayview, though this is not confirmed. His parents, John and Mary, were both born in Prussia, but their residency location in the U.S. is unknown, as is the date of their immigration. It is unknown if John had any siblings. Captain Brotch's early years are also largely unknown. The earliest record of him is his marriage certificate in August 1877, age 22, when he is living in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, occupation sailor. He was likely crew aboard an unknown schooner home-ported in Manitowoc, owned and captained by Fred Manga. Shortly after getting married, in August of 1877, John Brotch moved with his young family to Bayview, likely late the next year, 1878. His residence is Smith Street, but the specific street number is not provided, and he appears to have continued to live there through 1881. He is listed working as a labourer, of which sailing as a crewman would definitely qualify. On 28 October 1880, John Brotch, still likely living on Smith Street, began his first foray into ship ownership and eventual transition into being both owner and captain. He became co-owner of the schooner Elbe with Captain Fred Manga. In 1882, John moved his family to 27 Lincoln Avenue. It has since been torn down. Then, on 18 August 1882, John Brotch and wife Johanna purchased Lot 26 in the Rogers and Bentley subdivision in Bayview, with the intent of saving up to build their house on it. This is the site of the present home at 515 East Lincoln Avenue. That same year, 1882, John Brotch became a lake captain for the first time of the schooner Elbe, and, at the same moment, bought out Fred Manga to become sole owner of the schooner Elbe. The next year, 1883, Captain Brotch moved his young family, that now included 3 small children, across the street to 26 Lincoln Avenue. He continued to remain as owner and captain of the Elbe until late November 1883, when, after a series of accidents, he had to abandon the Elbe in Milwaukee's inner harbour next to the St. Paul Elevator A. One of these accidents, in late October 1883, was particularly life-threatening. On a cold, dark, stormy night on 21st October 1883, John Brotch, as captain of the schooner Elbe, sailed out of Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, into the teeth of a huge gale on Lake Michigan. His destination was just down the Wisconsin coastline at the port and town of Two Rivers. If he could brave his way through this storm, he'd be at Two Rivers by morning. But as soon as he left port, he collided with another schooner, the Capella, that was headed in the opposite direction into the Sturgeon Bay port. They'd been unable to see each other in the stormy, black, starless night. The collision wrecked all of the sails on the Elbe, except for the 2 jib sails at the bow. Barely able to manoeuvre, John Brotch, in the Elbe, was at the mercy of the storm and waves. However, the strong wind was directly behind him, so, with just the small jib sails at the bow, he was able to generate enough power to maintain steerage way for minimal control. Captain Brotch could have easily turned immediately to the west, back towards land, and made it to the safety of another set of piers, just south of Sturgeon Bay Port. But instead, his sails in tatters and useless, he elected to sail on through the storm. The reason? He had a cargo of hardwood to deliver to a customer waiting for him in 2 rivers. Likely remaining at the helm all night in the storm on Lake Michigan, John Brotch made it to 2 rivers the next morning on just those 2 little jib sails, and successfully delivered the product to the customer. It was undoubtedly one of the greatest feats of pure seamanship in Great Lakes maritime history. Due to John's time available now ashore, after the loss of the Elbe, he likely took time off from working during 1884 to 85 to build a small house on his Lot 26. This was the first house built on Lot 26, and has since been torn down. Its location today would be at the right front, or northeast corner of the lot, where the current house at 515 East Lincoln Avenue stands. John and his family likely moved into it in spring 1885. After this first house was built, and there would be 2 more, John Brotch took 2 jobs ashore. The first, from May 1885 to 86, was as a teamster, which was likely on the docks, loading and unloading cargo from the ships that called there. Then, the next year, 1887, he was working as a driver. He likely took these non-sailing jobs because he had been away from the sailing business for a couple of years, building his house. After the house was built, he undoubtedly then tried to return to sailing, but was thwarted, since most schooner captains, of which he was one, owned their own ships, that they themselves then captained. These were often 2-masted schooners, which were the most common type of ship on the lakes at the time. The owners of the larger schooners, 3, 4, and even 5-masted ones, would often hire out the captain job, but these opportunities were fewer because there were not as many of these larger schooners, so the chance of getting one was limited. Therefore, the likelihood of John Brotch finding another schooner to captain without actually owning it was very difficult. Another factor that may have hampered him was that he likely worked on the house through the spring of 1885. Most captain jobs would have already been filled during that winter when the lakes were covered in ice as the owners prepared for the spring thaw. In the spring of 1888, 21st March 1888 to be exact, John's brother-in-law, William A. Draves, financed the purchase of the schooner Sassacus, in partnership with neighbour and fellow Bayview lake captain turned lumberyard dealer Charles Ellis, who lived on East Ocean Street. The author believes that this was a quid pro quo deal that provided for John Brotch to become the captain of the Sassacus in return for William Draves's investment, to be used by Ellis to rebuild the main deck so it could carry lumber. The 1/3 share purchase by Draves was placed in John Brotch's wife's name, Draves's sister Johanna, Jenny Brotch, making her Bayview's first and only female shipowner. A couple months later, from 31st May 1888 to 26th April 1890, John and Johanna left Bayview and moved their young family out to Wauwatosa to another house, also provided by her brother William Draves, so that he, William, could build the first floor for them of the current main house that exists today on their Lot 26 in Bayview at 515 East Lincoln Avenue. John Brotch, though not officially documented, is believed by the author to have captained the Sassacus for all of the 1888 sailing season. Then, in January 1889, Charles Ellis bought out William Draves's 1/3 share and sold the Sassacus to a Toledo, Ohio owner. John Brotch, now without a ship to captain, likely took a day labourer job for the 1889 sailing season, perhaps back down on the Milwaukee docks, though this is unknown. The start of the next year, on 17th January 1890, John Brotch purchased the schooner Arctic from well-known Milwaukee shipbroker John H. Pawley, using money likely saved up from living rent-free in the Wauwatosa house built for him and his wife Johanna by her brother William Draves. At the time of the purchase of the Arctic, Captain Brotch informed a reporter that he intended to sail the 112-foot-long ship by himself during the 1890 sailing season, an indication he had used all of his money to make the purchase, but had none left over to pay for a crew to sail it. On 24th April 1890, John Brotch sold the Arctic to his other brother-in-law, Charles Draves, most likely in exchange for money from William Draves to hire the crew he now knew he couldn't sail without. The Arctic thus became a true Draves family schooner. Charles Draves, owner, his brother William Draves, financier, and John Brotch, brother-in-law and captain. Just a couple of days later, John and family moved into the new single-floor house at 515 East Lincoln Avenue that had been built for him and wife Johanna by her brother William Draves. Two items here are of particular interest. The first is that captaining the Arctic made John Brotch Bayview's most prolific schooner captain, at 3 ships, with the Elbe and the Sassacus being the first 2. The second is that during this frenzy of house building and ship ownership, swapping within the family, Charles Draves became owner of the schooner Arctic on the very same day, 24th April 1890, that he was also sworn in as a U.S. citizen. Ship ownership law at the time required all owners to be U.S. citizens. This was no coincidence. All of this above was facilitated by William A. Draves, the wealthy older brother of John Brotch's wife Johanna, whose goal was simply to help his kid sister. William Draves was Bayview's greatest rags-to-riches story, starting out as a Bayview day labourer and iron moulder, and later co-founding 2 of Milwaukee's greatest companies. These were the Chain Belt Company, which became the Fortune 500 company Rexnord, Inc., and is still headquartered to this day in Milwaukee, and Northwestern Malleable Iron Company, which was America's largest, that was bought out in 1902 by famed New York City financier J.P. Morgan. If you would like to read more about the above ship and house transactions, and also about Bayview's very own William A. Draves, please read the 550-page book about it that's titled A Brother Helps His Sister, The True Story of William A. Draves, the Schooner Arctic, and the house at 515 East Lincoln Avenue. Almost exactly 3 years later, on 22nd April 1893, William and Charles Draves transferred sole ownership of the Arctic to their sister Johanna Brotch. This made her Bayview's first and only female shipowner, twice over when adding her first one, the Sassacus, in 1888. Her husband, John Brotch, remained as captain. Together, they managed the Arctic as a team. Johanna is likely to have handled all the paperwork, bought supplies, and paid the bills. John sailed it and managed the crew as captain. It was also during this time that the Arctic and one other schooner, named the Conquest, that was owned and captained by Bayview's Thomas Kearns. Captains John Brotch and Thomas Kearns's homes were right behind each other, on East Linus Street and East Lincoln Avenues. The next year, 1 month into the sailing season, on 18th of May, 1894, the Arctic was severely damaged in a storm on Lake Huron, losing its rudder and nearly causing John Brotch and his crew to drown. Rudderless in the 60-mile-an-hour gale, the Arctic began to be blown ashore onto the rocks near Fort Gratiot Lighthouse, north of Detroit, Michigan, and certain death when Captain Brotch ordered the ship's anchor be dropped, in the hope it would hold fast on the lake bottom and halt the ship's march toward destruction. It did, and all survived. However, the damage to the rudder made the Arctic uneconomical to repair, and it had to be sold just 2 weeks later, on 31st of May, 1894. The loss of the Arctic began a 6-year process for John Brotch of seesawing back and forth between crew to captain to shore jobs. For the rest of 1894 and 1895, he appears to have become a crew member on likely another schooner, name unknown. But in 1896 to 97, he got another ship and became a lake captain again aboard a probable schooner, his fourth, making him Bayview's most prolific schooner captain twice over, his prior command of the Arctic being the first. The name of this schooner is unknown, but the likely candidate is the Narragansett, just purchased by Bayview lake captain and neighbour John Leask in April 1896, who contracted out the captain job for the 1896 sailing season, since he was captaining another ship at the time, the schooner barge Amboy. See more details in the episode on John Leask. The arrangement was similar to what Charles Ellis had done with the Sassacus in 1888 to 89, when he too likely hired John Brotch to captain it for him. But in 1898 to 1899, Brotch relinquished command to John Leask and then took a job ashore as a machinist. Note the exact years vary a little, depending on how they fall within the unknown data solicitation time frame and publication date of the Milwaukee City Directories for John Brotch during this time. Then, as the new century began in 1900, Brotch, who had worked as a machinist for the prior 2 years, found another ship and became captain yet again, his fifth, and a probable schooner, since that is what he has always been seen captaining, and likely the only type he was licensed to captain. Its name is unknown, but there is a candidate, which we'll discuss in a moment. This fifth ship further cemented John Brotch for a third time as Bayview's most prolific schooner captain. But later in the fall, tragedy struck the family. Husband and father, Captain John Brotch, died on 29th September 1900. The cause and location of his death is unknown, but it is believed by the author to have occurred when his ship sank in a storm. This is because any and all information searched for in all sources, newspapers, census and city directory records, Milwaukee County death records, etc., about his cause of death, place of death, and burial location turned up nothing. This absence of information fits the scenario that he went down with his ship, and his body was never recovered. There is a primary candidate, though not confirmed, for this sunken schooner, the Narragansett. The same Narragansett he'd likely captained in 1896 to 97, owned by Bayview neighbour and fellow lake captain John Leask. While John Brotch is not confirmed as its captain here in 1900, there is a lot of circumstantial evidence that points to it. First, the time of its sinking off remote Coburn Island, near Canada, on Lake Huron on 12th September 1900, matches up with Brotch's official death date of 29th September 1900. According to limited reporting, the Narragansett had ended up on the island's rocks during a gale, then slipped off and became mostly submerged as it floated back out into the lake, where it was later towed to safety and rebuilt. The crew would have had time to make it off, but as captain, John Brotch would have been the last to leave, and may not have made it as the ship floated off and submerged. A surviving crew member would then have had 2 weeks to make it back to Milwaukee, where the ship had been home-ported for many years, to tell John's wife Johanna by 29th September 1900. Second, the remoteness of the island and the fact that the ship didn't actually sink may have resulted in a lack of reporting. While the grounding is recorded, what happened to the crew, whether they survived or not, especially the captain, is not. Maybe, if all the crew survived, the captain was thought to be included in that group, when he actually was not. So it was assumed everyone made it. Could the reporting of the grounding be limited because of this assumption? Third, the Narragansett had a substantial Bayview connection. It was owned by Bayview Lake Captain John Leask, and neighbour just 5 blocks away from John Brotch, starting in 1896. Leask was already captaining the schooner barge Amboy then, so he would no doubt have had to hire another captain to sail it for him that first year. By coincidence, this is the same year, 1896, that John Brotch secured another lake captain job after a 1-year absence. It's entirely possible, if not probable, that Leask hired Brotch as his 1896 captain, and that he did so again in 1900 for the same reason. Leask, though owner of the Narragansett, was likely, though it isn't confirmed, still captaining the Amboy. Fourth, John Leask was 10 years older than John Brotch, and, because they were neighbours, likely knew John was looking for a ship to captain. It's possible John Leask wanted to give John Brotch the opportunity not only to captain a ship again, but also a 3-masted one at that. So it could have been a mentoring situation. John Leask would have known John Brotch had 6 children at home, and was underemployed. In sum, it could easily have been the case that John Leask was extending a hand and giving a younger man a chance to move up in capability as a captain by gaining experience captaining a much larger 3-masted schooner, close to a father-son situation. Fifth, no other owner is documented after Leask, and the ship is confirmed home-ported in Milwaukee in 1900 and 1901. But while Leask is captaining a technically unknown ship, it was likely the Amboy, which he had been captaining since 1898, and had a long association with. In fact, when the Narragansett sunk for good in 1901, Leask remained a captain through 1902, after it sank, so it's unlikely he was captaining the Narragansett during this period. So who did Leask choose as his captain? It's unknown, but, per above, John Brotch, to repeat, a neighbour, coincidentally returned to being a lake captain in 1900, and died on 29th September that year. The Narragansett ran aground on Coburn Island, on the remote Canadian northern Lake Huron coast, on 12th September, just 2 weeks before. Then there's the delay in reporting and unconfirmed crew and captain status in just one news report about the accident, explained above, that supports the timeline for John Brotch being the captain. While it can't be confirmed with existing documentation, there is a pretty good chance that John Brotch drowned when the Narragansett lifted up off the rocks and slid back into the lake before he could get off. The timeline, the circumstances of the grounding, the lack of news reporting, the dates of John Brotch's commands matching up with John Leask's ownership of the Narragansett, but not always its captain, them both being neighbours, all certainly shows a confluence of data points outside of news reporting that would indicate John Brotch could very well have been captain. Please see more detailed information about this in Captain John Leask's episode on this channel, and also in even greater detail in a special appendix found in the book titled A Brother Helps His Sister, The True Story of William A. Draves, the Schooner Arctic, and the House at 515 East Lincoln Avenue. John Brotch married Johanna Draves in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, on 21st August 1877. A few years later, he Americanized his last name from Brotchki to Brotch. Likewise, Prussia-born wife Johanna took on the nickname Jenny. They had 6 children: William, John Jr., Edward, nicknamed Eddie, Jenny, Caroline, nicknamed Carrie, and Leonie, nicknamed Sadie. As previously discussed at length, when the new century began in 1900, tragedy struck the family when husband and father Captain John Brotch died on 29th September 1900. All but one, William, were living at home at 515 East Lincoln Avenue when their father died, It is very telling that in those days it was customary to name the firstborn son after the father. But in this case, William, as firstborn son, was named not after John, his father, but after Johanna's older brother, William Draves. This is perhaps the greatest testimony to the amount of help William Draves provided to Johanna, his little sister, that ranged from building the house at 515 East Lincoln Avenue to buying 2 schooners, the Sassacus and the Arctic, for her husband John Brotch to captain. In the immediate years after John Brotch's death, wife Johanna is seen and documented involved in many family outings. On the photo to the right, the unidentified young girl may be Johanna's youngest daughter, Leonie, though that is not known. William and Emily Draves' children would have been older. Then, in 1906–07, wife Johanna's brother and benefactor, William Draves, and his wife Emily died. Then, for Johanna, things got even worse. In the space of 9 years, from 1911 to 1920, Johanna Brotch lost 5 of her 6 children, and her mother. Her mom had moved in with Johanna at 515 East Lincoln Avenue in 1908, after brother William and wife Emily had died. Before COVID and the Spanish flu, there was the highly contagious disease tuberculosis. This is what killed 3 of Johanna's children, and likely also her mother. Johanna's children who died from this terrible disease were sons Eddie in 1911, aged 25, John Jr. in 1913, aged 33, Johanna's mother, Caroline, in 1913, age 87, and finally Johanna's youngest child, Leonie, who went by the nickname of Sadie, in 1914, age 26. John Jr., Mother Caroline, and Sadie all died at home at 515 East Lincoln Avenue. Eddie had just left home for Arizona to take a railroad job and had already contracted TB before he departed. John Jr., an iron worker at his Uncle William's former Wisconsin Malleable Iron Company, just 1 block away on Bay Street, had been an avid and competitive bicyclist, appearing in several bike races in Milwaukee. Leonie, or Sadie, as she was nicknamed, had worked as a stenographer at the famous Alhambra Theatre in downtown Milwaukee. Johanna's remaining 2 daughters also died soon thereafter. Daughter Jenny, recently returned home to 515 East Lincoln Avenue from working as a domestic servant at a girls' school in Nebraska, died in 1917 of a blood clot after a hospital operation. Daughter Carrie, after having gotten married at age 22, then quickly widowed, died of unknown causes in Denver, Colorado, in 1920. Johanna had Carrie's body brought home, as she had done 9 years earlier with son Eddie. Oldest son William died in 1928, in San Diego. None of the Brotch children themselves had any children, and the bloodline died out. Today, Johanna and all but 1 of her children, William, are buried together in the same plot at Forest Home Cemetery, just around the corner from her beloved big brother and hero, William A. Draves. But Johanna kept going. Though now living alone, she regularly attended Draves' family outings. This one in the photo, held in August 1923, shows Johanna, now aged 65, front and centre as the family matriarch, surrounded by young nephews, nieces, and older Draves family relatives. Johanna, Jenny Brotch, Bayview's first and only female shipowner, died alone at her home in 515 East Lincoln Avenue in December 1948, aged 91. She outlived her husband John by nearly 50 years, and all of their 6 children by nearly 30. She had lived at 515 East Lincoln Avenue in Bayview from 1890 to 1948, an astonishing 58 years. Their father, Captain John Brotch, Bayview's most prolific schooner captain, can be found today in a location known but to God. His cause and location of death never accounted for. His remains unlocated. Other than his death date of 29th September 1900, the details of his death are a complete and total mystery. Very probably, though, he lost his life doing what he loved, captaining a ship on the Great Lakes. Special note: a more detailed account of Captain Brotch, his sailing adventures on the Great Lakes, and his Bayview family can be found in the 550-page book, A Brother Helps His Sister, The True Story of William A. Draves, The Schooner Arctic, and the House at 515 East Lincoln Avenue. Thanks for watching. This photograph isn't about Bayview or its lake captains, but it's from the same era of Great Lakes maritime history. We thought we'd close with it for enjoyment, as it captures the spirit of the era. In addition, this channel and its matching website also plan to support various maritime history projects related to Bayview's lake captains. One of these is a plaque and marker with the captains' names and addresses on it, as part of the creation of the Bayview Lake Captains Historic District, which will be the first of its kind in America. If you would like to donate to support these projects, to include this and other markers honouring Bayview's lake captains, with 100% of all donations and contributions in all forms going to support them, please consider donating to us through the listings shown next. If, for some reason, we are unable to secure these markers, then all funds donated to this site will be given as a cash donation to the museum ship SS City of Milwaukee in Manistee, Michigan. That is the only surviving intact ship once captained by at least 2, and likely 3 different Bayview lake captains. I'm Simon Stanhope, narrator for these episodes. Join us again soon for the next chapter of Bayview, Town of Lake Captains.